The first letter arrived on a Tuesday, the paper crisp and unnaturally white against the weathered wood of Eliza's mailbox. She almost mistook it for a bill, but the handwritten address caught her eye. No one wrote letters anymore. She slipped a finger beneath the flap, tearing it open as she walked back to her apartment through the late October chill. Dear Ms. Eliza Winters, it began in careful, precise handwriting. My name is Daniel Thorne. You don't know me, but I know of you through your grandmother, Margaret Winters. Eliza paused on the steps of her apartment building, the wind tugging at her scarf as her eyes scanned the page. Her grandmother had passed away 3 months ago, and leaving Eliza with an emptiness that still felt raw. I'm currently serving a 15-year sentence at Lakewood Correctional Facility. Your grandmother volunteered in our library program for 7 years. She spoke of you often, and with great pride. Eliza's brow furrowed as she continued reading. I have a terminal diagnosis, pancreatic cancer stage 4. The doctors give me 6 months at most. I have no family left, no one to speak for me. Your grandmother once mentioned that you work as a lawyer. I wonder if you might consider visiting me? I have a final request that I believe only you can help me fulfill. The letter was signed with a simple, sincerely, Daniel Thorne, inmate number 47293. Eliza folded the letter and tucked it into her bag. By the time she reached her apartment, she had already decided she wouldn't respond. She had enough on her plate with her caseload at the public defender's office. The last thing she needed was to take on the problems of a convicted criminal who had somehow charmed her soft-hearted grandmother. Yet, 3 days later, she found herself on the visitors list at Lakewood Correctional, seated in a sterile room with institutional beige walls, waiting for a man she'd never met. When the guards brought him in, Eliza was struck by how ordinary he looked. Daniel Thorne was tall and lean, with salt and pepper hair cropped close to his scalp. His face was gaunt, but his eyes were clear and steady. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame, hinting at recent weight loss. Ms. Winters, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Thank you for coming. I'm not making any promises, Eliza replied, her professional armor firmly in place. I'm only here to listen. Daniel nodded, settling into the chair across from her, his wrists shackled and resting on the table between them. That's all I ask? For several moments, he simply studied her face, as if comparing her to some mental image. You have her eyes, he finally said. Your grandmother's. Kind eyes, but they see everything. Eliza shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Thorne, you mentioned a request in your letter. Yes, he said, drawing a deep breath. I want to see the ocean one last time before I die. The simplicity of his request caught her off guard. The ocean? I grew up in a coastal town in Maine. The sea was my childhood companion, my solace. I haven't seen it in 12 years. His fingers interlaced, knuckles whitening slightly. I know what you're thinking. I'm a convicted felon. Why should I get a final wish? What were you convicted of? Eliza asked, the lawyer in her needing the facts. Armed robbery. No one was physically hurt, but I terrified those people. I can't undo that. His gaze remained unflinching. I was desperate and made terrible choices. I've had 12 years to live with them. Eliza opened her notepad. There are compassionate release programs for terminal inmates, but they're difficult to secure, especially for violent offenses. That's why I need your help. Your grandmother said you never back down from impossible cases. Eliza felt a pang at the mention of her grandmother. Gran had a rose-colored view of the world. No, Daniel said firmly. Margaret Winters saw people as they were and loved them anyway. That's a rare gift. The timer buzzed, signaling the end of their visit. As Daniel stood, he hesitated. Whether you help me or not, thank you for coming. It meant something to see Margaret's eyes again. As Eliza drove home, she told herself she was being manipulated by a convicted criminal with nothing to lose. Yet something about Daniel Thorne's quiet dignity had gotten under her skin. By the time she reached her apartment, she had already begun drafting arguments in her head for a compassionate release petition. The next morning, Eliza requested Daniel's case files. The facts were straightforward. 12 years ago, Daniel Thorne had walked into a convenience store with a gun, demanded money, and fled with less than $300. He was caught 2 days later, confessed immediately, and received a 15-year sentence due to prior nonviolent offenses. What the dry legal documents didn't explain was why a man with no history of violence would suddenly commit armed robbery. Eliza needed to understand. Her second visit to Lakewood was less formal. Daniel looked worse than he had a week before, the pallor of his skin more pronounced. "You came back," he said, a note of surprise in his voice. "I need to know the whole story if I'm going to help you," Eliza replied. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he placed them on the table. "I had a daughter, Lily. She was diagnosed with leukemia when she was 7. The medical bills..." He shook his head. "I lost my job, then our home. The insurance company denied her experimental treatment. I was desperate." "Where is Lily now?" Eliza asked softly, though she suspected the answer. "She died while I was awaiting trial. I wasn't there." His voice cracked. "Her mother never forgave me. She moved away, remarried. I haven't heard from her in a decade." Eliza felt her professional detachment wavering. "And there's no one else?" "Just your grandmother. She helped me get my GED in here, then an associate's degree. She brought me books about the ocean when I told her how much I missed it." As the weeks passed, Eliza threw herself into Daniel's case, and with an intensity that surprised her colleagues, she filed a compassionate release petition, gathered medical documentation, and worked to secure housing and hospice care, should the release be granted. Between the legal work, her visits to Lakewood became more frequent. Daniel told her about growing up in a small fishing village, about his childhood adventures along the rocky Maine coastline. He spoke of tidal pools teeming with life and the particular quality of light on water at dawn. In turn, Eliza shared stories of her grandmother and her own childhood summers spent at Margaret's cottage in the Berkshires. "She used to wake me before sunrise," Eliza recalled during one visit. "We'd take mugs of hot chocolate down to the lake and watch the mist rise off the water as the sun came up. She called it greeting the day properly." Daniel smiled, the expression transforming his gaunt face. "That sounds exactly like Margaret." With each visit, the formal distance between them diminished. Eliza began to recognize the sharp intelligence behind Daniel's quiet demeanor, his dry humor, and the depth of his regret over the path his life had taken. 3 months after her first visit, Eliza received the call she'd been hoping for. Daniel's petition had been granted. He would be released into hospice care for his final months. She drove immediately to Lakewood to deliver the news herself. Daniel's face, now hollow-cheeked and ashen, lit up when she entered the prison infirmary. "You look like you've won the lottery," he said. "Better," Eliza replied, unable to contain her smile. "You're getting out. The petition was approved." For a moment, Daniel seemed unable to process her words. Then his eyes filled with tears. "I never thought..." He cleared his throat. "Thank you, Eliza." It was the first time he had used her first name, and something shifted between them in that moment. A recognition of connection that went beyond lawyer and client. The release process took another 2 weeks. By then, Daniel was significantly weaker, requiring a wheelchair for more than short distances. On the day of his release, Eliza waited outside the prison gates, her heart pounding with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. When Daniel emerged, dressed in civilian clothes that hung loosely on his frame, the sunlight seemed to catch him by surprise. He stopped, tilting his face up to the sky, eyes closed. "Are you okay?" Eliza asked, moving to his side. "Better than okay," he replied, opening his eyes to look at her. "I forgot how blue the sky is without seeing it through fences." Eliza had arranged for hospice care in a small house near the coast, a 2-hour drive from the city. As they traveled, Daniel watched the landscape change through the car window, occasionally pointing out things that delighted him. A red-tailed hawk circling above a field, children playing in a park, the changing colors of autumn leaves. "Everything looks different," he said, "brighter somehow." The hospice house was modest but comfortable, with a small garden and a view of distant waters from the upstairs window. Daniel insisted on standing at that window despite his weakness, gazing out at the thin blue line of ocean on the horizon. "Almost there," he whispered. It was another week before Daniel felt strong enough for the trip to the shore. Eliza had found a quiet stretch of beach, accessible by a short path that his wheelchair could navigate. The October air was crisp, carrying the distinctive scent of salt and seaweed. When they reached the edge of the sand, Daniel asked to stand. Eliza supported him as he rose shakily from the wheelchair, his body leaning heavily against hers. "There she is," he said, his voice filled with reverence as he gazed at the expanse of ocean before them. "Just as I remembered." They stood together, watching the waves crash against the shore, the wind tugging at their clothes. Daniel's face held an expression of such pure joy that Eliza felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Would you walk with me?" he asked. "Just a little way?" Eliza nodded, keeping her arm around his waist, as they made their slow way down to where the waves lapped at the sand. Daniel bent with effort to remove his shoes, then stepped forward until the cold water swirled around his ankles. He closed his eyes, swaying slightly. "I used to dream of this," he said. "The sound, the smell, the feel of sand between my toes. In my darkest moments, this memory kept me going." Eliza watched him, struck by how the sunlight softened the lines of suffering on his face. In that moment, she could see the man he might have been if life had dealt him different cards. As the autumn days shortened, Daniel's strength ebbed like the tide. Eliza arranged her work schedule to spend as much time as possible at the hospice house. They developed a routine, mornings on the small porch when weather permitted, afternoons reading together or watching nature documentaries about the ocean, evenings talking long into the night. Eliza found herself sharing things she had never told anyone, her fears, her dreams, the loneliness that had been her constant companion since childhood. Daniel listened with complete attention, offering insights that revealed his own depth of understanding about human nature. "How did you become so wise in prison?" she asked him one evening, as they sat watching the sunset. "I had nothing but time to think," he replied. "And your grandmother brought me books that asked the big questions. We talked about them for hours." In turn, Daniel spoke of his regrets and his hopes. "If I could go back, I'd make different choices," he said. "But then I wouldn't have met Margaret. Or you." The words hung between them, loaded with a meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. As November turned to December, Daniel's condition deteriorated rapidly. The hospice nurse increased his pain medication, and he spent more time sleeping than awake. On his lucid days, Eliza would bundle him up and take him to the shore, where they would sit in silence, watching the winter waves crash against the rocks. During one such visit, with a wool blanket tucked around his legs and the weak winter sun on his face, Daniel turned to her. "I need to tell you something." Eliza nodded, her heart contracting at the seriousness in his voice. "I've fallen in love with you," he said simply. "I know it's impossible. I know it makes no sense, but I need you to know before I go." Tears filled Eliza's eyes as the truth she had been avoiding crashed over her. somewhere between the prison visits and the quiet evenings reading together, between his stories of the ocean and her memories of her grandmother. She had fallen in love too. "It's not impossible," she whispered, taking his hand. "It just came at the wrong time." Daniel smiled, the expression containing both joy and sorrow. "Maybe in another life we would have met differently, had more time." "Maybe," Eliza agreed, her voice breaking. "But I'm grateful for the time we've had." That night, as snow began to fall outside the hospice house windows, Daniel's breathing became labored. The nurse warned Eliza that the end was near. She sat beside his bed, holding his hand, telling him stories about the ocean, about summer days and starlit nights, about all the beautiful things in the world. In the quiet hours before dawn, Daniel stirred, his eyes finding hers in the dim light. "Take me to see the sun rise over the water," he whispered, one last time. Eliza knew it was against medical advice, knew the risk of moving him in his condition, but she also understood this final wish was the culmination of everything that had brought them together. With the nurse's reluctant help, they bundled Daniel in layers of blankets and transferred him to the car. The drive to the shore was silent except for the sound of his labored breathing. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten as Eliza parked as close as possible to their usual spot. "I can't carry you," she said, her voice catching. "I can walk," Daniel insisted, "with your help." Step by painful step, leaning heavily on Eliza, Daniel made his way to the water's edge. They sank down into the sand together, his head resting against her shoulder as they faced the horizon. The first rays of sun broke over the water, turning the waves to molten gold. Daniel's face, though drawn with pain, glowed in the dawn light. "Perfect," he whispered. "This is how I want to remember the world." Eliza held him close as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows behind them on the sand. She felt the exact moment when his body relaxed against hers, when his breathing stopped and his spirit slipped away with the receding tide. Later, she would arrange for his ashes to be scattered over these same waters. She would establish a scholarship in his name for children of incarcerated parents. She would visit her grandmother's grave and thank her for bringing Daniel into her life. But in that moment, as the winter sun warmed her tear-streaked face, Eliza simply held the man she had come to love, grateful for the brief, impossible connection they had shared. Like the ocean before them, their story had been beautiful, powerful, and ultimately uncontainable, existing now only in memory, but no less real for its brevity. In the years that followed, Eliza would return often to the stretch of shore. Sometimes, standing with her feet in the cold Atlantic waters, she could almost feel Daniel beside her, his presence as constant and mysterious as the tide itself. And in those moments, she understood that love, like the ocean, doesn't recognize the boundaries we try to place around it. It simply is, enduring beyond time, beyond circumstance, beyond even death itself.